In an earlier mini lesson, we started to differentiate between the four genres of creative writing: drama, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, with which we'll be experimenting in English 240 this semester. This time, let's try and take a closer look at the essential difference between, first, the two genres of prose we'll be trying out, fiction and nonfiction, and then start to develop our understanding of the one genre we will concentrate on in this module, fiction. In that earlier mini lesson, we concentrate on the similarities that fiction and nonfiction share because they are both forms of prose. As a friendly reminder, that list includes the facts that they are written in sentences, organized into paragraphs, and intended for an audience of readers. And I should add that in creative writing, both fiction and nonfiction tend to take the form of narrative, which is the fancy professor term for story, instead of, say, descriptive or expository prose. The essential difference between them is that fiction is, well, fictional, and that nonfiction is factual. That is, what we write about in fictional stories is understood to be not true, and what we write about in nonfictional essays is understood to be true. If we were to consult a thesaurus, synonyms for fictional that might help us to go beyond that simplified definition of not true include invented or imagined. And if we were to consult an etymology dictionary, that is a reference book that traces the origins of words and the changes in their meanings over time, we might get an even more complex understanding. In an etymology dictionary, we could trace our modern English word fiction back to the Middle English word fiction, the Old French word fiction, the Latin word fictionem, and that's where we get to the true root of fiction, because the Latin noun fictionem came from the verb fingere, which meant to shape or to form. Because even when we as writers draw inspiration for fiction from real-life events, we then shape them into a form that can exert what Edgar Allan Poe famously called a singular effect on our readers. To learn more about Poe's profoundly influential concept of the singular effect of a prose story, we'll be reading his 1842 review of Nathaniel Hawthorne's celebrated collection, Twice Told Tales, in this module. Poe had an explicit preference for shorter forms of fiction, which he called tales back then. Now, we tend to call them short stories. Longer forms of fiction we tend to call novels. Speaking of the lengths of forms of fiction, let's take a minute to talk about the approximate word counts. A novel tends to be more than 50,000 words. A typical length, though, is between 80,000 and 100,000 words. A novella tends to be between 20,000 and 50,000 words. A novelette tends to be between 10,000 and 20,000 words. Some definitions, though, set the boundary between a novelette and a novella at 17,500 words instead. A short story tends to be between 1,000 and 10,000 words. A short story, which is the form of fiction that Starkey concentrates on in Chapter 2 of Creative Writing, 4 Genres in Brief, tends to be a short story of less than 2,000 words. A flash fiction tends to be fewer than 1,000 words. Though I've published longer stories, I've specialized in forms of flash fiction of fewer than 1,000 words. Over the years, depending on the then trends, that category has included sudden fictions, microfictions, hint fictions, postcard fictions, nanofictions, Twitter fictions, and even 6-word stories. However long or short the form we shape them into, if they're fiction, those stories will be narratives written in sentences, organized into paragraphs, and intended for an audience of readers. And they will be fictional, that is, invented or imagined.